Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to be jumping right into a really fascinating, quiet thought experiment today. We're looking at how vastly diverse worlds might actually be able to stay connected without completely erasing each other in the process. It's a deep dive into how we interact on a global scale and why our usual instincts for trying to understand one another might actually be making things harder.
So let's kick things off with a massive question that really challenges our baseline assumptions about global connection. Does humanity becoming one mean that we all have to share the exact same values? Like, must we all believe in the same history, choose the exact same institutions, and want the identical future? It's a pretty heavy question, right? But it perfectly sets the stage for what we're going to unpack today.
To answer that, we really have to fundamentally rethink what unity actually looks like on a planetary scale.
We live in this era of unprecedented constant connection, and we tend to just assume that shared history or global institutions will automatically lead to harmony. But as it turns out, mere contact is not a shortcut to actual comprehension. In fact, when we try to force everything into one single, easily understandable format, we might make the world a bit easier to manage temporarily, but we end up losing something absolutely vital.
And that brings us to a really fascinating concept, the idea of different civilizational times.
So, the idea here is that different societies don't just live in different physical locations, they exist in entirely different historical and cultural times. Picture this contrast. On one hand, you have societies that are entirely oriented toward continuous growth, cities accelerating tech, systems prioritizing individual freedom. But then, on the other hand, you have societies oriented toward maturity, communities preserving tradition, cultures organized deeply around relationships, land, or kinship. And notice how neither of these is a later or better stage of development. They're just totally distinct paradigms of existence.
You know, these unique civilizational times are shaped by an incredibly complex web of local experiences. We're talking everything from past crises to surrounding environments to deeply embodied bodily experiences. Because of all that complexity, it's literally impossible to just place these societies on a single, linear evolutionary ladder from backward to advanced.
So what happens when we just ignore all that beautiful complexity and try to force everything into a universal framework anyway?
Well, we usually do it by measuring things. We rely on standard indicators, things like GDP, productivity metrics, technological adoption, or freedom indices to make different societies legible to one another and to try and foster cooperation. And hey, on the surface, that seems super practical, right?
But this creates what we can call the compression pipeline. By measuring literally everything against one standard, we accidentally create a single story of progress. We take wildly different civilizational times, we slap common metrics on them, compare them, rank them hierarchically, and poof, suddenly we've erased all those vital, nuanced differences.
And here's the real kicker. Whatever falls outside of those specific metrics basically becomes invisible. Even worse, those untranslatable differences get incorrectly dismissed as irrational, or dangerous, or just backward. The difference is no longer understood in its own rich context, it's just compressed down into a measurable deviation from the norm.
Okay, so if this compression pipeline isn't the way to go, let's look at two entirely different structures for how civilizations might actually live alongside each other.
The first model is coexistence through assimilation. This creates short-term peace through shared rules, common markets, and syncing up institutions. It looks amazing on paper, mostly because it allows for massive, large-scale cooperation, but it absolutely comes at a hidden cost.
While assimilation looks super stable on the outside, it silently pushes the untranslatable parts of a culture to the absolute fringes. The differences are still there, for sure, but they aren't allowed to publicly participate. So you get this nice surface-level stability, but underneath, unresolved differences are just quietly accumulating heat and friction, like a pressure cooker.
Now flip that around and compare it to coexistence through plurality. This model doesn't demand 100% agreement. Instead, it relies on partial translation. It actively preserves those untranslatable points and embraces the idea of ongoing boundary adjustment. It basically acknowledges that, hey, we don't have to perfectly understand each other to peacefully share a planet. It's a continuous, living movement. Coexistence in this model isn't some finalized, signed contract. It's this ongoing, respectful negotiation of contact and distance. We're constantly asking, where do we actually need distance, and which points of contact should we definitely keep open?
Which brings us perfectly to the core definition of planetary plurality. It's the realization that becoming one and remaining connected are two totally different things. Planetary plurality is about multiple worldviews remaining connected without completely absorbing, unifying, or erasing one another. It's all about keeping those pathways of reconnection wide open. To actually pull off this kind of plurality, though, we have to acknowledge something pretty humbling: the untranslatable foundations of civilization.
This goes way beyond just speaking different languages. Take a word like freedom, right? In one society, freedom literally means the individual's ability to leave the community and act independently. But in another society, freedom means having a secure, guaranteed role within the community so you never have to face life isolated and alone. Same exact word, entirely different structural reality.
And that creates this massive illusion of a shared vocabulary. We might use the exact same words, like justice or nature or ownership, but because those words are built on completely different histories and embodied experiences, they support entirely different lived realities. Civilizational dialogue is tough because the very premises that construct our worlds just do not match up. This is actually a huge point when we think about modern technology, especially artificial intelligence. As we introduce AI into global communication, its true value shouldn't be about smoothing out all these differences to generate one single universal truth. Instead, AI should ideally function as a transparent atmosphere, a space that actually preserves these unique cultural premises and lets multiple, sometimes totally unresolvable interpretations safely coexist side by side. Navigating all of this requires a concept called the ethics of distance. It's understanding that getting closer or forcing total understanding isn't always the goal. Sometimes, distance is a vital protective buffer. It's having that fluid ability to step back, suspend judgment, and retain the ability to reconnect later on, all without destroying the relationship in the meantime.
There's a quote here I really want you to just sit with for a second. Silence is not the absence of dialogue, but a temporary distance to avoid absorbing the other into our own meaning. Wow. That perfectly captures the quiet respect required to just let another worldview exist without needing to conquer it, fix it, or fully comprehend it. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought to really chew on. If humanity truly becomes a planetary society, is our ultimate goal to share one single, synchronized worldview? Or is the highest form of maturity actually the ability to live in different worlds, acknowledging we may never fully understand each other, yet gracefully ensuring we never lose the path back to one another? Thanks so much for exploring this with me today.